The God's Wood of Winterfell stood in breathless silence, its ancient heart tree watching with 1,000 carved years of patience as men and women rushed around it like frightened ants. Torches bobbed in the distant courtyards. The clang of steel, the curses, the shouted orders all felt thin and faint beneath the looming hush of the night. Above, the sky was a black shroud without stars, and the cold that pressed down upon the world was not the honest cold of the north. It was deeper, older, a stillness that drank sound and breath and warmth. Bran Stark sat in his wheeled chair beneath the heart tree, cloaked in furs, hands folded in his lap. His eyes were on the snow, watching the slow drift of flakes that did not melt on his skin. To anyone stumbling by, he looked like a boy abandoned to his thoughts, waiting to die with the tree. But somewhere else, behind his pale, distant gaze, he was already far away. He was moving through roots and sap and stone, drifting along an endless web of memory that stretched from the white cliffs of Skagos to the smoking shores of far Valyria. He felt the heartbeat of the weirwoods, each slow thud echoing with faces, voices, and moments that were not his, but which had nested in him like remembered dreams. He saw the children of the forest chanting beneath red leaves, the first men carving faces into trees, the long night rolling like a black tide over fields of dead and dying. And beyond those memories, colder and sharper than ice, was the figure that walked through them all like a shadow. The Night King. Bran followed him, not as a bird or a beast, but as a thread of awareness woven into the tapestry of time. The Night King moved through visions that were not just past, but might be, will be, never were. The difference was a sensation that Bran's human mind still struggled to grasp, like knowing the weight of a thought or the color of a sound. He saw the Night King walking through Winterfell's broken gates, blue eyes burning beneath a crown of frost. He saw Jon Snow lying sprawled and lifeless on the snow. He saw Arya leaping with a knife that shattered in midair. He saw dragons screaming and falling from a sky filled with black snow. And he saw something else. A path where the Night King never quite reached him at all. It was a faint line, a thin strand of possibility running beside the river of doom. It was not safety, not truly, but it was different. The world was not spared the cold in that vision. It was remade by it. Bran let his awareness slide along that strand. He watched as the Night King reached for him in the God's Wood, as cold fingers brushed his brow, as power that had slept since the children's first desperate spell flowed into him instead of through him. He watched the mark the Night King had left on his arm flare bright and blue, watched ice spread through his veins and into the tree behind him, watched the patterns of the weirwood network shift as if a new root had forced itself into the earth, displacing all others. He saw himself stand. The vision made no sound. There was only the knowledge of what it would feel like. The crunch of frozen grass beneath his bare feet, the unnatural lightness in his legs, the way pain and weakness fell away, replaced by an aching clarity. And within that clarity, there was a crown of thorns made of time itself, settling on his brow. If he took this path, he would not die. Not truly. If he refused it, all the other strands led toward an ending of fire and fragile, fleeting mercy that shattered as soon as men remembered how to hate. "I understand," Bran whispered, though no one heard him. His breath fogged faintly in the air beneath the heart tree. He had seen too much, as the three-eyed raven before him had warned. The more he knew, the more he understood the shape of things. Men broke their oaths. Kings burned cities. Gods, if they existed at all, played with lives as if they were seeds on a game board. The long night had come once. The dragonfire that would beat it back again would birth its own apocalypse. There were futures where cities burned under emerald flame, where dragons screamed as they consumed the world's harvest, where thrones made of swords were not enough for those who sat on them. Those futures were not worse than endless winter. They were simply different kinds of ruin. The weirwoods were older than all of that. Their memory was patient. Their patience was cold. Bran let his awareness retract, branches folding back into a trunk. The gods would float around him again in dull, mortal color. The rustle of the heart tree's leaves sounded like breathing. Somewhere beyond the walls, There was the muted thunder of hooves and the distant shriek of dragons. Men shouted in fear. Women whispered prayers. The dead were coming. "Are you all right?" Sansa's voice came from behind him. Bran turned his head slowly. His sister stood there, wrapped in heavy wolf furs and leather armor sewn with dark, subtle embroidery. Snow clung to her eyelashes, melting as quickly as it fell. Her eyes were sharp and searching, but under their steel Bran still saw the girl who had once dreamed of songs and handsome princes. "Yes," Bran said. "You're sure you should be out here alone?" Sansa glanced toward the walls, where fires burned on the battlements and silhouettes moved back and forth against their glare. "The dead. They will come here," Bran told her. "That's the point." Sansa's mouth tightened. "I know that," she said. "I'm not stupid, Bran." He studied her face for a moment, then blinked once in slow apology. "I didn't mean you were." For an instant, something like warmth flickered between them, brittle and brief. It faded beneath the weight of the night. "You see him?" she asked quietly. "The Night King." "Yes. And can you see after?" Bran looked past her, through the opening in the Godswood wall where the battlements rose. Through stone and steel and snow he saw lines of possibilities branching like the veins of a leaf. He saw corpses rising, dragons falling, the Red Woman burning, Arya bleeding, Jon screaming as a spear took him through the chest, Daenerys kneeling in the snow with ash on her face, Cersei watching from a balcony far to the south as the sky dimmed. He saw himself burning with the tree, frozen with it, shattered into 1,000 pieces of useless memory. And he saw himself cold and whole, eyes like blue glass, standing above a world made quiet. "Yes," Bran said. "I see after." Sansa swallowed. "And nothing you would want to hear," he said. There it was, then, that old anger, flaring in her eyes. "You talk in riddles and half-truths, and you expect us to trust you," she snapped, the strain of command cracking her calm facade. "You say this, you suggest that, and now you tell me the world ends badly no matter what we do. What are we fighting for then, Bran? What is the point of any of this?" Bran looked up at her, and for a heartbeat, something almost like human grief moved across his features. "We're fighting," he said, "because not all endings are the same." Sansa stared at him. The wind tugged at her hair. Somewhere a horn blew, long and low, and all the color drained from her face. "They're here," she whispered. "Yes." Bran's voice did not change. "You should go." She hesitated. "Will you?" Her eyes flicked toward the Godswood, the tree, the empty air beside him. "Will you be all right?" Bran thought of the visions, of cold fingers and shattering futures. "Yes," he said again. "I will be all right." Sansa nodded once, sharply, then turned and strode away, her cloak billowing behind her like a banner. When she was gone, Bran let his eyes drift shut. He didn't warg, not at first. Instead, he let himself feel his own body, the biting cold on his cheeks, the pins and needles that sometimes crawled up his legs when he sat too long, the weight of the furs on his shoulders, the ache in his spine that never completely left him. He listened to the weak, uneven beat of his heart. He remembered falling from the tower. He remembered his father's hand on his hair. He remembered his mother's fierce embrace. He remembered Arya's wild laughter and Robb's pride and Rickon's small fingers clutching his sleeve. He remembered Hodder's last stand, the way his friend's eyes had gone from simple confusion to wordless terror and then to desperate, stubborn courage. He remembered because soon it would all just be information. "I'm sorry," Bran whispered to no one and everyone. Then he let go. His mind slipped its fragile shell like a snake shedding skin. He soared upward, not as a bird this time, but as something less defined and more immense. He rose through the heart tree's veins, shot along roots that tangled beneath Winterfell like a nest. He poured outward, carried in the sap of every weirwood in the north, then beyond. He brushed against the cold hearts of stones sunk deep into the wall. He tasted the pain of shattered forests and broken rivers. And there, riding at the front of a storm of ice and silence, he saw him, the Night King, riding a dead horse whose hooves made no sound on snow. Around him marched the White Walkers, tall and pale, armor shimmering like brittle glass. Behind them, a sea of corpses, eyes burning blue, moving as one. Bran could see the mark on his own arm from here, a faint echo of the power that surged at the Night King's command. He followed that echo, letting it guide him inward, narrowing from the vastness of trees and ice to the point of contact between them. The Night King turned his head, as if hearing a whisper. Bran did not speak with words. He pushed an intention through the mark, a thought like the crack of a frozen lake. Come. For the first time in an age, something like surprise flickered in the Night King's eyes. He quickened his horse. Frost spread beneath its hooves, a creeping tide of glassy, dead ice that swallowed the snow and the earth alike. Above, storm clouds boiled, churning with a pale light that was not lightning. The dead surged forward, driven by a will ancient and implacable. Winterfell waited, its walls lined with fire and fear. In the courtyard, Jon Snow moved among the men, giving last-minute orders, his sword at his hip, Longclaw's pommel glinting faintly. His breath steamed in the air as he gripped the shoulders of men he had fought beside at the wall, in the wild at Hardhome. Every face he passed, he saw again with blue eyes and frozen skin in his nightmares. "Remember," he said hoarsely to a group of spearmen, "aim for their weapons, break them apart. Don't let them surround you. If you fall, get back up. If they fall, keep them down." A horn sounded again, closer now. The sound sent a reflexive tremor through Jon's bones. "Jon!" Tormund's voice boomed from the nearest rampart. "You might want to see this." Jon cursed under his breath and climbed the steps 2 at a time, snow crunching under his boots. He emerged into a blast of cold so intense it felt like a fist. The fires in the braziers guttered, nearly snuffing out. Beyond the walls, the world had become a moving shadow. They came on like a tide. The army of the dead spread across the darkness, a carpet of pale shapes moving in unnatural unison. Gates creaked open to thunder of hooves as the Dothraki prepared their charge, rocks already burning with orange flame as Melisandre walked among them, murmuring words in her strange, musical accent. To the far right, Unsullied formed into disciplined ranks, shields locked, spears ready. Above, Rhaegal and Drogon circled, their roars swallowed by the unnatural hush before the storm. Jon's eyes tracked past them, searching the line of the dead. For a moment he saw nothing but whites and scattered, glittering figures. Then he saw him. The Night King rode slowly, unhurried, his gaze fixed on Winterfell's walls, on the glowing heart tree beyond. The air arrow, Yuendihim shimmered with cold. He held no weapon, only a long, jagged spear of ice slung casually across his lap. His eyes met Jon's, though the distance between them should have made that impossible. The look was not hatred, not even contempt. It was recognition, as if Jon were a piece on a board he had already studied. Jon's hand slid to Longclaw's hilt. That cold gaze reminded him forcibly of another, younger one, from another life, standing in Winterfell's yard as the snow fell softly around them. "Bran," he whispered, without fully knowing why. The Dothraki screamed their war cries and charged, burning blades cutting arcs through the dark. For a heartbeat, hope leaped in Jon's chest, wild and desperate. He watched as the riders vanished into the swirling snow, their fires bobbing, flashing, then going out. One by one, like stars being extinguished, torches dimmed along the walls. Men shifted uneasily. Jon's knuckles whitened on the stone. The dead hit the front lines with a sound like 1,000 bones snapping. The battle began. In the chaos that followed, with dragons diving and screaming, fire and ice clashing beneath a sky churned to madness, Bran watched. He saw Jon fighting, sword rising and falling in a brutal, economical rhythm. He saw Arya moving like a shadow, Valyrian steel singing in the dark as she danced through the dead. He saw Sansa in the crypts, back rigid, hand stilling its tremor by sheer will as she ordered panicked folk into something like order. He saw them and countless others, and knew that no matter how bravely they fought, this line of futures ended in the same place. The Night King walking into the Godswood, cold radiating from him like light from a star. Bran had watched that moment in 100 variations. In some, Arya fell before she could leap. In others, the Night King turned in time and caught her knife, freezing her where she stood. In a few, she struck true, dagger plunging into his chest, the shattering sound echoing forever in the night. Those were the threads Daenerys's dragons preferred, the ones where fire won, if only for a while. But there were threads beyond those, threads where neither fire nor death was victorious.
Branche aux ouanes.
The Night King's horse slowed as it approached Winterfell's outer defenses, then stopped altogether as if sensing something beneath the ground. Frost raced out from its hooves, turning snow to glass. Above, a dragon roared, and a storm of green flame crashed down, obliterating whites in a roaring inferno. They burned, shrieking, ash swirling up to join the falling snow. The Night King did not look up. He swung down from his saddle with fluid grace, boots crunching on ice. The walkers moved with him, flanking him. The dead flowed around them like a river around stones, mindless and endless. He walked through the storm. Arrows of dragonglass shattered harmlessly around him. Gouts of dragonfire roared across his path, diverted by invisible currents of cold. A giant, its flesh torn and hanging, crashed against Winterfell's walls, howling. The Night King did not break stride. The gods would beckon him, not with warmth, but with a silence that matched his own. The heart tree's red eyes watched his approach impassively. A raven startled from its branch, black wings beating furiously against the unnatural stillness. The Night King paused at the edge of the Godswood boundary, the invisible line where old magic thickened in the air. He inhaled, not breath, but memory, the flavor of centuries of prayers and blood sacrifices. For the first time since the children had driven the dragonglass into his chest, he felt something like resistance. The boy sat beneath the tree, waiting. The Night King approached, his steps unhurried. Frost curled around his feet, creeping along the roots of the heart tree. The air grew so cold that the sap in the trunk stiffened, slowing. Bran's breath crystallized on his lips. "You took my mark," Bran said quietly. His voice did not tremble. "You made a path." The Night King stopped a few feet away. He tilted his head slightly, eyes flicking to Bran's arm where the faint scar burned with a dull blue light. 1,000 years ago, he had been a man whose name no one remembered. He had known fear then, and rage and betrayal. Those things had been burned out of him, replaced with something clear and vast. But somewhere in the deepest hollows of his being, a memory stirred at the boy's calm tone. The memory of choice, taken from him. He reached out. Bran did not flinch. He leaned into the touch. Cold speared into him, not just into the mark, but into his eyes, his veins, his bones. It sought pathways, ran along nerves and through memories, looking for weakness, for flesh that could be turned to ice, for a mind that could be shattered and enslaved. It met not resistance, but an open door. Bran had been waiting for it. He let the cold inside. In that instant, everything changed. The Weirwood Network, already a vast mapping of lives and deaths, flared like 1,000 candles lit at once. The power that had been the Night King's, born from the children's terror, from winter's oldest hunger, from the first long night of the world, poured into that network like water into parched roots. It spread, not just through snow and stone, but backward and forward in time, along the threads of memory that Bran had wandered so long. The Night King felt it too. He felt his control slipping, being drawn away along paths he had never known existed. His will clenched around it, ancient stubbornness rearing up like a beast cornered. He tried to wrench away from the boy, to reclaim his power, to crush this human mind daring to touch his cold eternity. But Bran wasn't merely a boy. Not anymore. He had been remade by visions and training and pain. He had learned to live half in the past, half in the now. He had seen himself die 1,000 times and accepted each death. His identity was not a single straight thread, but a braided cord of countless lives lived and relived through the trees. He did not fight the Night King's will. He absorbed it. For a heartbeat, they were both falling. Bran saw through the Night King's eyes as he had seen through ravens and wolves. He saw the children of the forest forcing a man down, the dragonglass dagger plunging into his chest, fire and agony turning to clean, crystalline cold. He saw years of endless marching, of building armies of dead, of watching human empires rise and fall with detached indifference. He felt the simple, brutal clarity of his purpose: end the age of men, return the world to silence, end the noise, the blood, the breaking. The Night King, in turn, saw through Bran's eyes. He saw a boy pushed from a tower by a golden-handed knight. He saw dragons hatching in a storm. He saw a man with a sword of black steel kneeling to behead a deserter. He saw a red woman birthing shadows. He saw a little girl with a needle of a sword, whispering names into the dark. He saw a quiet, watchful girl with auburn hair learning cruelty at a lioness's feet and turning it into armor. He saw a bastard boy die and rise again, his heart weary but still beating. He saw the weirwoods, countless and eternal, watching all of it. And beyond all that, Bran opened the visions he had hoarded closest, the futures that had yet to be. He showed the Night King's cities burning under dragonfire, streets choked with ash and screams. He showed him thrones toppled, kingdoms ground into dust not by winter, but by men's ambition and dragons' hunger. He showed him endless cycles of war and peace and war again, each victory sowing the seeds of the next ruin. He showed him that even if fire won tonight, it would not save the world. It would only reshape its suffering. Something inside the Night King shuddered. He had never doubted his purpose. He had never considered that there might be more than two choices: his silence or their fire. And yet here, in the web of roots and blood and memory, he saw a third path, faint and terrible. A world remade in his image, not as pure obliteration, but as order. A frozen Westeros, where oaths could not be broken because they had hardened into unchanging ice. Where kings could not burn cities because there were no cities left to burn. Where the dead did not hunger, did not betray, did not lie. Where every breath of wind carried not prayer or laughter, but the simple whisper of snow. He reached for that vision with a desperation that shocked him. He was no longer certain whether that desperation was his, or the boys, or the trees. The gods shuddered. In the courtyard beyond, men felt a wave of cold roll over them, so intense that they gasped and staggered. A few cried out as frost bloomed on their armor, their beards, their lashes. Dragons faltered mid-flight, their flames guttering. Whites froze where they stood, not in defeat, but in paralysis, as if waiting for a command that had not yet been given. In the godswood, time stretched and twisted around the two figures locked together beneath the heart tree. Bran felt his human self begin to crumble. He clung to memory, not of the grand, sweeping visions, but of small things. The smell of bread in Winterfell's kitchens, the tickle of shaggy direwolf fur against his face, Arya sneaking him honey from the table, Robb arguing good-naturedly with Jon over some strategy in the yard, Sansa humming a tune from some southern ballad as she brushed her hair, his mother's kiss on his forehead the night before they went south. He poured those memories into the place where his mind met the Night King's power, like oil poured onto ice. The cold tried to harden them, to trap them, but they were not still. They moved, slipping through cracks, warming them, expanding them. The Night King's will faltered, for it had never learned how to move around such things. It had only learned how to stamp them out. For a moment, a brief, fragile moment, Bran was more than human and more than the Night King. He was both. He was the boy and the ancient cold, the memory of laughter and the silence after the last voice dies. He was the weirwood roots twisting through the earth and the frozen storm sweeping across the sky. He made a choice. He did not choose fire. He did not choose oblivion. He chose winter. Outside the God's Wood, Arya Stark sprinted across snow that had turned slick with frozen blood. She had a knife of Valyrian steel in her hand and death in her eyes. She had moved like a whisper through chaos, guided by shadows and whispers and the Red Woman's cryptic words. She had reached the edge of the God's Wood, muscles coiled, breath burning in her chest, ready to leap. She saw the Night King, hand on Bran's arm, and flung herself forward. For a heartbeat, everything was exactly as the gods had decreed. Then the world shifted. A wave of power exploded outward from Bran's body, invisible yet palpable as a hammer blow. It knocked Arya out of the air as if she had struck a wall. She hit the ground hard, breath whooshing from her lungs, her knife skittering away. The Night King stumbled. His fingers, still clamped on Bran's arm, spasmed. Frost raced up his wrist, not outward, but inward, as if the cold he commanded had turned on him. Cracks appeared in his skin, glowing blue, then white, then something colorless and blinding. Bran's eyes snapped open. They were no longer hazel. They were blue, brighter and deeper than any cold night sky. Yet within their depths moved faint shapes like leaves caught in a winter stream. When he spoke, his voice echoed with layers, as if 1,000 other voices whispered the same words an instant before and after. "Enough," he said. The Night King tried to pull away. His face contorted, not in fear, he had forgotten that, but in something like shock. His will surged, trying to reclaim control of the dead, of the storm, of the very winter itself. Bran raised his other hand and placed it on the Night King's chest, directly over the old, healed wound where the dragonglass had first pierced him. "I understand you," Bran whispered, "and I will do what you could not." He pushed. For the second time in his existence, the Night King screamed. He shattered, not like breaking glass, with a single clean sound, but like a glacier collapsing, layer after layer giving way. His body froze solid, then splintered into shards that exploded outward in a spray of ice dust and brittle, glittering pieces. The sound shook the God's Wood, the castle, the wall far to the north. Whites howled as blue light went out in their eyes, some collapsing, some simply freezing in place as if their strings had been cut. But the power that had animated them did not vanish. Bran drew it in. It poured into him like a roaring river, threatening to tear him apart. It swelled inside him, crashed against the boundaries of his human shape. He felt his skin harden, his bones grow light and cold, his blood turn slow and crystalline. He felt his heartbeat falter, then resume in a new, measured rhythm, like the slow thud of sap in an ancient tree. His legs tingled, burned, then flooded with sensation he had not known in years. He stood. The furs fell away from his shoulders as he rose to his feet beneath the heart tree. The bark pressed against his back felt warm compared to the cold radiating from his own skin. Frost crawled from his bare toes across the ground, turning blades of grass to glass. Arya, tangled in roots and snow where she had fallen, stared up at him, eyes wide, face pale. "Bran?" she whispered. He turned his head slowly, as if testing the movement of a newly forged blade. His features were the same, yet changed. His cheekbones seemed carved from pale stone. His hair fell in dark, straight strands around his face, dusted with frost that did not melt. Those eyes, those impossible blue eyes, regarded her without blinking. "It's me," he said, and his voice, though layered with echoes, still carried the cadence of the boy who had once pleaded to learn to fight like Jon. Arya pushed herself up, chest heaving. Her fingers scraped across snow, searching for her knife. It lay a few feet away, its dark blade half buried. She didn't reach for it. "What did you do?" she asked, her throat tight. Bran looked down at his hands, flexing them slowly. When he exhaled, his breath came as a faint mist of icy crystals, drifting downward like tiny shards of glass. "What I had to," he said softly. "I made a different ending." Beyond the God's Wood, the sounds of battle were changing. The roar of dragons faded, replaced by confused shouts and eerie silence. Jon staggered through a gap in the broken wall, Longclaw dripping frozen blood. He stopped dead when he saw Bran standing there, the Night King gone, the heart tree's face iced over in a thin sheen of frost that traced the lines of its carved eyes like tears. "Bran," Jon said. His voice was raw. Bran turned toward him. The frost beneath his feet thickened with each step he took, creeping outwards in delicate, branching patterns. "Hello, Jon," he said. Jon's hand tightened involuntarily on Longclaw's hilt. What happened?" Arya's gaze flicked between them, some instinct deep in her bones telling her that this was a moment like the Red Wedding, like Ned's beheading, like the fall from the tower. All those sharp edges where the world cleaved into a before and an after. "The Night King is dead," Bran said. "The long night, as you understand it, has ended." Jon let out a breath he hadn't realized he was holding. His shoulders slumped. Behind him, through the trees, men were beginning to stagger into the Godswood, faces smeared with blood and ash. Their eyes were wide with disbelief as they saw the frozen stillness of the dead outside, the way the whites stood like statues, their blue eyes dim, no longer advancing. "You did it," Jon whispered. "You killed him." Bran nodded once. "Yes." "Then why?" Jon's words trailed off as his mind caught up with what his eyes had already told him. He took a slow step forward. "Your eyes." Bran's lips curved in something that was not quite a smile and not quite anything human. "I had to take his power to end him," he said. "There was no other way." Jon swallowed. "And now?" Bran looked past them, out through the Godswood, beyond Winterfell, beyond the battlefield. His awareness, which had once needed ravens and wolves as anchors, now moved effortlessly through roots and ice, through snow and stone and wind. He felt every white on the field, every white walker frozen in place, awaiting his will. He felt the wall itself, its spells frayed and torn by the Night King's passage. He felt the cold at the heart of the far north, the place that had once been the Night King's true seat. He felt Westeros, beating and burning and weeping. "Now," he said slowly, "I rule." The words hung in the air, faintly absurd in their simplicity. Bran Stark, the boy who had wanted to be a knight, who had spent years unable to walk, now spoke of ruling with the calm certainty of a man listing the day's weather. "Rule," Arya repeated, her tone sharp. "Who asked you to rule, Bran?" He looked at her. "No one," he said. "That's the problem, isn't it? No one ever asks. They take, they burn, they conquer, they write songs afterward and call it destiny." He tilted his head, eyes unfocusing as he watched a dozen futures unfold and fold again. "I won't burn. I won't conquer like that. I will end the cycle." Jon's skin prickled. The words sounded reasonable. They always did when tyrants first spoke them. "How?" he asked quietly. Bran's gaze sharpened. For a moment, the boy shone through the cold, tired, sad, burdened with knowledge no one should bear. "There's always a price for life," he said. "The price for ending the long night this way is winter." He lifted his hand. Outside Winterfell's walls, the sky changed. The storm clouds thickened, pressing down like a physical weight. Snow began to fall in earnest. Slow at first, then faster, heavier, thick flakes that did not melt on contact. Winds rose, swirling the snow into great white curtains that obscured the world beyond a few hundred yards. But it was not the chaotic, wild blizzard of the Night King's advance. It was ordered. The snow fell in patterns Bran could see, lines of cold weaving themselves into a tapestry across the land. He felt rivers slowing, lakes icing over. He heard the crack of branches as trees stiffened, their sap thickening into sluggish slush. He tasted the fear of men in southern castles, looking up from warm hearths as an unnatural chill seeped under their doors. "Winter was always coming," Bran said. "They made of it a warning. I will make of it law." "Bran," Jon said sharply, "you saved us. The dead are stopped. Let that be enough. Don't do this." Bran turned back to him. The cold that radiated from him was not painful, exactly. It was clarifying. It stripped away warmth, and with it softened lies, illusions, comforting stories. "Is it enough?" Bran asked. "To win this battle and leave the world as it is? You know what men are. You've died for them. You've killed for them. How long before another mad king burns a city? How long before another queen raises a dragon? Another lord decides he's owed a crown because his father wore one?" Jon's jaw clenched. "That's not for you to decide." "Whose decision, then?" Bran's eyes glowed brighter. "The gods? Which ones? The old, the new, the red? They've all had their turn at playing with us. They break us to prove themselves. I have seen them, Jon. I have seen their shadows on the world. I'm tired of them." His voice resonated through the godswood, through the bones of the castle, through the roots of the heart tree. Men shifted uneasily, stepping back instinctively as frost crawled closer to their boots. "We fought the dead," Jon said. "We didn't fight so you could become them." Bran's gaze softened, just a little. "I'm not them," he murmured. "I remember who I was, who I am. I'm Bran Stark of Winterfell. I am the three-eyed raven. I am something new. That's what frightens me," Arya said quietly. Bran looked at his sister. He saw the girl who had once begged him to climb with her, the little wolf cub who had never fit in with southern courtesies, the assassin forged in a foreign temple. He saw the list she had whispered every night, the names melted away by time and death, the ones still fresh on her tongue. "You kill for justice," he said to her. "You strike down men who hurt others. You know what I'm trying to prevent." She didn't flinch. "I know what happens when someone says only they know what's best." Bran's lips twitched again, that almost smile. "Perhaps," he said, "perhaps I am wrong, but I have seen what happens if I do nothing. Those endings are worse." He turned away from them, facing the heart tree. His hand rose, fingers brushing the carved face's cheek. Frost spread from his touch, thickening the ice that already veiled the red eyes. "Winter will come to all of Westeros," he said softly. "It will not be the sudden death of the long night. It will be slower, gradual. Fields will fail, cities will shrink, people will move south and south, and south until there is nowhere warmer to run. And then," Jon demanded, "what happens then, Bran?" "Then," Bran said, "the noise will stop." The world shivered. Years passed more quickly in Bran's mind than they did for anyone else, because he saw them all at once. The first winter after the Battle of Winterfell was harsh, but not as terrible as it might have been. People hailed it as a return to the old ways, a reminder that, for all their dragons and southern wars, the North was still the North. They chopped wood. They buried their dead. They told tales of the night the dead walked and were stopped by the courage of men and women whose names already began to blur into legend. In King's Landing, Daenerys Targaryen stood on the battlements of the Red Keep, looking out over a city that still smelled of smoke. She had taken it at terrible cost, dragons burning Lannister ships and scorpions alike, but the bells had rung before the worst could happen. Jon had stood beside her on the ruined streets, hands bloodied from the wolf's work he had done in the dark. He had looked at her with eyes hollowed by war and truth. He told her what Bran had become. She did not believe him at first. "What does your brother know of ruling?" she had asked, voice sharp with frustration. "He sits in a tree and looks at clouds. Let him keep his north. I have a world to remake." But then the second winter came, and it was worse. Snow began to fall in the Reach in the height of what should have been summer. Harvests failed in the riverlands. Flocks dwindled in the Vale. In Dorne, where snow was a word from children's stories, a thin dusting of white appeared on the highest peaks, then on the lower ones. The seas grew treacherous, storms blowing in strange, icy patterns that wrecked ships and froze their crews solid. Daenerys summoned maesters, red priests, seers. Their answers varied, but one thread wove through them all. The North had become colder than any living man remembered. The land itself was changing. Bran sat in Winterfell's godswood, and the snow did not touch him unless he wished it. The heart tree had grown strange under his hand. Its branches stretched wider, its face sharper beneath a thick layer of ice that never melted, even in the brief, false thaws that came and went like a lie. The pond at its feet had frozen solid, the ice so clear it looked like glass. Sometimes, when men walked past it, they thought they saw shapes moving in the depths. A wolf, a crow, a tall, thin figure with a sword of flame, only for the images to vanish when they looked again. He rarely spoke now except when he had to. Sansa visited him in the God's Wood often in those early years. She came wrapped in the heavy furs of a ruling Stark, her crown plain but solid on her brow. She came as the Lady of Winterfell, as queen in the north in all but name. The bannermen listened to her. The small folk trusted her. She had built alliances, balanced food stores, moderated disputes. She had done everything a good ruler should. And yet every decision she made felt like painting over cracks in a wall that was slowly but surely collapsing. "You could help," she told Bran one day, her voice tight. "You could make the winters less harsh. You could send visions to farmers, show them which crops will grow. You could do something other than sit here and watch us starve." Bran's gaze drifted over her, through her, to the snow-laden branches overhead. "I am doing something," he said. Sansa's hands curled into fists. "What exactly?" "Killing us slowly instead of letting the dead take us quickly. In the futures where I eased the winter," Bran said, "men wasted the reprieve. They fought the same wars over the same crowns. They called it hope, but it was merely an excuse to go on as before." His eyes focused on her. "You of all people know what they do with ease and comfort, Sansa. You saw it in King's Landing." "I did," she said. "That doesn't mean they all deserve to freeze." "Deserve," Bran repeated. "I am not concerned with deserts. I am concerned with outcomes." Sansa stared at him, breath steaming in the cold air. "You're talking like one of them," she said quietly. "Like one of those lords who sent men to die because a line on a map offended them." His head tilted, hair whispering against the ice behind him. "I remember being their subject," he said. "I remember what that felt like. I haven't forgotten." "But you've stopped caring," she whispered. He didn't answer. As the years passed and the winters lengthened, it became harder to say where Bran ended and the winter began. He spread his awareness farther south, riding the snowstorms, settling his senses into ice forming on rivers and lakes. He watched the golden fields of the Reach grow pale and withered. He watched the proud towers of Old Town's high tower crust over with frost. He listened to the frightened whispers in darkened halls in the Stormlands as thunder rolled over seas that no longer knew warmth. Everywhere he looked, he saw patterns. He saw how men responded to scarcity. Some bartered fairly, some hoarded, some turned to banditry, to raiding, to burning. He watched lords close their gates, leaving peasants to die in the drifts outside. He watched priests say that the snows were punishment for sins, that more prayers and more gold would ease them. He watched Daenerys in the Red Keep, prowling restless halls, her dragons uneasy as frost crept up the black stone of Dragon Pit. She tried to fight the winter at first. She ordered great fires lit in the streets. She sent ships south and east, looking for lands not yet gripped by cold, for food that could be brought back. She tried to distribute grain fairly, to quell riots with mercy and force in equal measure. But for every problem she addressed, two more appeared. The dragons grew sluggish. Their fire no longer melted snow as quickly as it fell. Their wings beat heavily through air that grew denser and colder each year. They huddled together at night, steam rising from their bodies, eyes half-lidded. "The world is dying," she told Jon one night, her voice so small he barely recognized it as hers. They stood on a balcony overlooking a city blanketed in white. The snow muffled the sounds of people and horses. The only loud noises came from sudden collapses as roofs, never meant to bear such weight, gave way and tumbled into the streets below. Jon's breath misted between them. He was older now, lines etched around his eyes by war and worry. His hair was touched with gray at the temples. The scars on his chest still pulled tight when he moved a certain way. "It's changing," he said. "Not dying. What's the difference?" She stared out over the city. "When I came here, I thought I would break the wheel. Instead, it feels as if something larger has rolled over all of us." He thought of Bran, sitting in the godswood, eyes like ice. "Something has," he said. They had argued about Bran dozens of times over the years. Daenerys saw in him a rival, a threat, a power she neither commanded nor fully understood. "He is what the old stories warned us about," she had said. "Not the Night King, but something worse. Someone with the cold's power and a man's ambition." Jon had defended his brother as best he could. "He was never ambitious," he said. "He didn't ask for this. He chose the lesser evil." "Spoken like a Stark," she had replied bitterly. "You chose the knife once because it seemed the lesser evil. How did that end for you?" Now, as snow fell on a city that had never been built for such weather, they both knew words weren't enough. "I have to go to him," Jon said at last. The decision had been forming in him for years, gathering weight like snow on a branch. Daenerys turned to him sharply. "To Bran? You've gone north before. He never listens." "I went as a supplicant then," Jon said. "I went as a brother asking for mercy. This time I go as—" He hesitated, the words heavy on his tongue. "As someone who might understand him." "Understand him?" Her laugh was brittle. "You are not like him. You are warm. You bleed. You still talk to people as if their lives matter. And yet," Jon said quietly, "I've killed more men than he's frozen. I've followed orders that got people slaughtered. I've made choices I thought were right that led to death. He swallowed. "I've betrayed people I loved because I thought it would save more lives in the end." She flinched as if he'd struck her. "This isn't the same," she said. "He isn't just making hard choices. He's remaking the war. LD in his image." "Maybe," Jon said, "or maybe he's become trapped in the only path he can still see. If there's a way off it, I have to try to find it." Daenerys looked at him for a long, long moment. At last she said, "And if there isn't?" He thought of Bran's eyes, cold and ancient. "Then I will do what has to be done," he said. She reached up, fingers trembling, and touched his cheek. "You always say that," she whispered. "I wish, just once, the thing that had to be done wasn't something that broke you." He caught her hand, pressed a kiss to her palm. "Me too," he said. He rode north with a small company, men and women who had followed him through the worst the world had thrown at them. Ghost padded at his side, older and grayer, but still fierce, eyes gleaming red against the snow. Arya rode behind Jon, her face set, her hair braided back tightly. She had tried living in a world of cities and courts. It had never truly suited her. The snow seemed to accept her as much as it threatened her. "I should go alone," Jon had told her. She had laughed, low and humorless. "You tried that before," she said. "How did that turn out?" Sansa stayed behind to hold the North together as best she could. Gendry ruled in the Stormlands, his blacksmith's hands now calloused by quills and seals as much as hammers. Tyrion, gray and thin, served as Daenerys's hand still, though he drank less now that there was less wine to be had. They watched Jon and Arya ride out and spoke quietly of odds and hopes and the things no one could say out loud. That if Jon did not return with some kind of answer, there might not be enough of a world left to worry about by the time the next generation was grown. The journey north was not like the journeys Jon had taken before. The land itself had changed. Where once there had been forests dusted with snow, there were now stands of trees encased in rime, their branches drooping under the weight of ice, bark split in long, jagged wounds. The sounds of birds had grown rare. The few that remained were pale, ghostly things, their feathers rimed with frost, their calls thin and eerie. Villages lay half-buried, roofs collapsed under snow that never melted. In some, the dead lay where they had fallen, their flesh preserved by the cold. In others, there were no bodies, only scattered bones picked clean by desperate wolves. Jon's company skirted these places when they could. When they couldn't, they moved through them in silence, faces set, breaths coming in sharp, painful gasps as the air grew thinner and colder. Fire warmed their hands, but not their cores. More than once, men woke in the night with their eyelashes frozen together. Beyond the last vestiges of human settlement, the world became stark and strange. The sky was a constant, low gray. The sun was a pale disk that barely rose before sinking again. Time blurred. Days and nights became indistinguishable, separated only by the guessing of their internal clocks and the slow burning down of their supplies. Jon felt Bran's presence long before they saw any sign of a dwelling. It was in the way the snowflakes fell in perfect, repeating patterns, like the spirals the White Walkers had once used to mark their hunts. It was in the eerie absence of wind, as if the air itself had grown too heavy to move without permission. It was in the way every crunch of snow under a boot echoed longer than it should have, as if the sound had become reluctant to die. "Someone's watching," Arya said one night, staring into the dark beyond the circle of their campfire. "I know," Jon said. "Not just the usual someones," she added. "It feels like the trees are watching, even though half of them are dead." "They are," Jon said quietly. He sees through them now, even the dead ones. Their memory doesn't fade just because they've stopped growing. Arya's hand brushed the hilt of her knife. "You talk like him sometimes," she muttered. "I hope not," Jon said. On the seventh day beyond the last man-made landmark, they found the palace. It wasn't a castle in any conventional sense. It had no walls, no battlements, no gate. It rose from the frozen ground like a cluster of colossal ice crystals, facets gleaming with inner light, towering so high that their tops vanished into the low, gray sky. Some plains were smooth as glass. Others were rough, etched with patterns that made Jon's head ache to look at. Spirals within spirals, branching webs that looked eerily like the maps of rivers he had once studied with Robb. At the structure's base, a wide, flat terrace of ice extended outward, smooth and flawless. It reflected the approaching party like a mirror, their figures distorted, elongated, ghostly. "7 hells?" someone whispered behind Jon. "This is what he's been doing," Arya said softly, "building himself a throne." Jon wasn't sure it was that simple. The palace felt less like a fortress and more like an expression, as if Bran had translated the patterns in his mind into frozen architecture. They dismounted, boots slipping slightly on the perfect ice, and advanced in a tight group. Ghost padded ahead, sniffing the air, hackles raised. No guards came out to meet them, no whites, no White Walkers. The silence was almost oppressive. Jon stopped at the base of a wide, sloping ramp that led upward into the heart of the ice. "Stay here," he told the others. Arya immediately stepped forward. "No, this is between me and him," Jon said. "If there's talking to be done, I have to be the one to do it. If there's killing to be done, then you're going to need someone to stab him if talking fails," Arya said. "We're Starks. We go together." He looked at her, at the set of her jaw, at the long, thin scars on her fingers from a lifetime of blades. At last he nodded. "Just us two," he said. "The rest stay here." The others, though unhappy, obeyed. They huddled near their horses, breath fogging in the air, watching as Jon and Arya ascended. The interior of the palace was colder than anything Jon had ever known. The air felt almost solid, every breath a labor. The walls refracted light in strange ways, creating illusions, corridors where there were none, forests of icy pillars that shifted as they moved. Jon had to rely on something other than sight to find his way. He followed a sense of presence, a constant, cool awareness at the back of his thoughts. Bran was waiting for them in the central chamber. He sat, if it could be called that, on a raised platform that grew naturally from the floor. It looked less like a throne and more like a sculpted outgrowth, a seat formed by the ice itself in response to his presence. The heart tree was there too, in a sense, a likeness of one, carved entirely from ice, its branches stretching up toward the high, domed ceiling. Its carved face was smooth and expressionless, eyes blank. Bran's own eyes glowed faintly in the dim light. He looked older than when Jon had last seen him in person, though it was hard to measure age on a face that had so thoroughly abandoned the small, human signs of it. His skin was very pale, almost translucent in places, as if the veins beneath had frozen into delicate patterns. Frost traced intricate lines along his jaw, his hair, his fingers. "Welcome," he said. His voice carried perfectly in the vast chamber. No echo, no distortion. Jon took a few steps forward, Arya at his side. "You built yourself a new god's wood," Arya said, staring at the ice tree. Bran's gaze flicked to it. "The old ones sufficed for a time," he said, "but their roots don't reach as far as I now need. This is an extension." "Of what?" Jon asked. "Of you. Of the pattern," Bran said simply. Jon took in a slow breath, felt it freezing in his lungs. "The world is dying, Bran," he said. "Crops failing, people starving, the sea itself turning to slush. This isn't just winter. It's the end of everything." "It's a correction," Bran said. "The world grew crowded, noisy, diseased, fire and steel and blood. This quiets it." "Quiet?" Arya barked a short, humorless laugh. "Is that what you call it when children freeze in their beds?" "They won't suffer," Bran said. "Not for long. The cold takes feeling, then thought. It is gentler than fire." Jon's hands curled into fists at his sides. "You talk like you're doing them a kindness." "In a way," Bran said. "Think of how many will be spared being burned, tortured, starved, enslaved. How many wars will never be fought because there is nothing left worth conquering." "There are people worth saving," Jon said. "Always. There are children who will never grow up, songs that will never be sung, lives that could be better than what came before if you just let them try." Bran looked at him steadily. "You said once that the people are who you serve," he said. "But people betray. People fail. They put their hopes in men and women who wear crowns and then watch those hopes burn. How many times must we watch the same tragedy play out before we accept that the play is flawed, not just the actors?" "Maybe that's all life is," Jon said, feeling the words tear at his throat. "Trying anyway, even when you know you'll fail, even when you know it'll hurt, choosing it over nothing." Bran's gaze sharpened, the faintest trace of something like pity flickering in those icy depths. "I remember when that argument convinced me," he said. "I remember feeling that stubborn warmth. It was beautiful, brief, and then I saw further. There are so many worlds, Jon, so many paths. In almost all of them, the suffering outpaces the joy. The songs do not balance the screams. I cannot unknow that." Arya stepped forward, shoulders stiff. "You sound tired," she said. "You sound like someone who's seen too much. I get that. I've seen enough to last 10 lives. But I still wake up and choose to fight." "Your world is smaller than mine," Bran said. It wasn't an insult. It was an observation. "You see what's in front of you. I see all of it. Behind, ahead. I see the child you once were, begging father to let you join us in the yard. I see the woman you could have been had you stayed in King's Landing, and the one who would have died in Bravos with a face not her own. I see 1,000 Aryas, 1,000 Jons, 1,000 Bran Starks. Their lives are threads in a tapestry whose pattern does not change. I am changing it." "Into what?" Jon asked. "A blank sheet. A still pond," Bran said. "No more storms. No more stones thrown to make ripples." Jon closed his eyes briefly. "And what of us?" he asked. "Do we freeze with the rest? Or have you saved a place for your family in this pretty ice garden?" Bran looked distant for a moment, as if listening to voices only he could hear. "Some will survive longer than others," he said. "Pockets of warmth. Places where people can live out their days in relative peace while the world settles. Perhaps in the far south, in the Summer Isles, some will adapt. But Westeros, as it is, cannot remain. It is too broken." "You'd wipe it all away," Arya said quietly. Everything we fought for, everything we lost. It will be remembered, Bran said almost gently. The Weirwoods will remember. I will remember. That's not the same, Jon said, anger rising like a fragile flame against the cold. Being remembered isn't living. It's a story. Useful, maybe, comforting sometimes, but it's not breath and heartbeat and choice. It's not Ghost at my side, or Sansa arguing with me about grain stores, or you and me sitting under the old heart tree, listening to old Nan's tales. Bran's expression flickered. For a heartbeat, the boy was there again, the one who had hugged his father's leg, who had scampered along Winterfell's walls, who had dreamt of knighthood. I remember, he said softly. Then remember this, Jon said, stepping closer. You're still one of us. You're still Bran Stark, whatever else you've become. And we do know. T abandoned our people to the cold. Bran lowered his eyes, and Jon realized he was shaking. Not from the cold, from the tension of holding so much power in check. You think I haven't asked myself if I'm wrong? Bran whispered. You think I haven't seen futures where I stepped aside, where I let you and Daenerys remake the world with fire and mercy? I have. I've watched them. I've watched them until I could quote you every law you passed, every noble gesture, every moment where you looked at each other and believed you'd done it, you'd made it better. And then it falls apart, Arya said bitterly. Because people are people. Yes, Bran said. Because people are people. Jon took another step forward. His breath crystallized between them, frozen in midair like a fragile sculpture. And because people are people, he said, they surprise you. They change. Not often, not enough, but sometimes. If you wipe us all away, you wipe away those chances, too. You freeze the world at its worst. Bran's eyes flashed. At its most honest, he said. Jon reached out, slowly, hand trembling. This was madness. He was standing before something that was no longer entirely his brother, something that had eaten the Night King and kept his throne. He felt the weight of 1,000 dead winters pressing behind those eyes. He felt the entire world's cold leaning into his palm as he placed it gently on Bran's shoulder. Bran, he said softly, look at me. Bran's gaze, which had been focused somewhere in the middle distance, snapped to Jon's face. For all you're seeing, Jon said, sometimes you miss what's right in front of you. You're not a god. You're a boy who's been made into something else. You're tired and angry and so full of other people's memories you can't hear your own thoughts. You're lonely. The word landed between them like a dropped stone. Bran flinched. He hadn't realized how lonely he was until Jon said it. The Weirwoods were company of a sort, but they were not people. The winter itself was a presence, but not a companion. The dead did not laugh, did not argue, did not sing off-key when drunk. He remembered sitting in Winterfell's hall, listening to the noise of his family, feeling safe and annoyed and loved. He had not felt that way in a very long time. I don't know if what you're doing is wrong, Jon said, voice hoarse. Maybe, in some grand measure, it's kinder than letting the world burn again and again. I'm a poor judge of such things. I swing a sword. I try not to lie. That's as far as my wisdom goes. But I know this. If you choose this path alone, if you carry this weight without anyone beside you, it will crush what's left of you that's still Bran. And I won't let that happen. Arya shifted, eyes flicking between them. Jon, she murmured in warning, hearing the tone that had preceded so many of his sacrifices. He ignored her. So I'm giving you a choice, he said to Bran. Not the kind the children gave the man who became the Night King. Not a knife in the chest. A real choice. He let his hand drop to the hilt of Longclaw. I can kill you, Jon said, the words tasting like ash. Maybe that ends all this. Maybe the winter you've started keeps going without you, and the world dies anyway. I don't know. Or you can step back. Not all the way. I know you can't be what you were, but you can loosen your grip. Give us a chance. Give yourself a chance to be more than the thing that ends us. The chamber felt smaller somehow, the ice closing in, the air crackling with tension. Bran watched Jon's hand on the sword. He saw 100 futures where that blade flashed and his body fell, shattering like the Night King's. He saw 1,000 where Jon hesitated, and Arya took his place, knife flashing from sleeve to heart, the way it had in all those visions long ago. He saw a few, very few, where he accepted Jon's plea. Those were the strangest to look at. They were blurry, uncertain, changing more than any others as he contemplated them. In some, the winter retreated a little, enough for fields to grow in narrow strips along coasts. In others, it lingered but softened, an endless autumn instead of death. In all of them, he remained divided, part of him still cold, still far-seeing, part of him still Bran, sitting in a godswood, arguing with his sisters, listening to Tormund's crude stories, rolling his eyes at Tyrion's jests. The futures where he died were clearer. They ended quickly, for him at least. For the world, they ended more slowly. Years of desperate scrambling as the cold continued to spread, leaderless now, messy where it had been ordered. He could not see an outcome where everything was saved. Some degree of loss seemed inevitable. That knowledge had driven him to choose the cleanest, coldest ending. But endings, Jon was reminding him, were not the only things that mattered. "Do you remember the day you pushed me on the swing?" Arya said suddenly. Both men looked at her. She shrugged slightly, cheeks flushed with more than the cold. "You were 7. I was 5. Sansa wanted a turn, but you kept pushing me higher because I asked. You laughed when she sulked. You told me if I wanted to fly, all I had to do was keep climbing, and I believed you." She stepped closer, joining Jon in that fragile cord of warmth stretched between the three of them. "You can't fly away from this," she said. "You can't just climb above us and decide we're all better off frozen. If you do, you're not my brother anymore. You're something else, wearing his face." Her hand rested lightly on the hilt of her knife. "And I kill monsters." Bran looked at them, at his brother and sister, at the last living pieces of the family that had shaped him. If he chose the clean cold, he would save them pain. Their deaths would be swift and unremarkable, lost in the great hush that followed. They would cease to worry, to argue, to hurt. They would become part of the stillness he come to worship. If he chose their path, they would suffer. They would lose more. They would bury children. They would fight wars they couldn't win. They would die anyway, sooner or later, as all men did. But for a little while, they would live. He closed his eyes. The ice palace shuddered. Cracks raced along some of its facets, not breaking them, but altering their angles. The temperature in the chamber rose by a fraction, enough that Jon's next breath didn't feel like knives. Far to the south, in a dozen villages and cities, snow stopped falling. In some, it began to melt just a little, turning the edges of drifts to slush. In others, the wind shifted, carrying air a shade warmer over frozen fields. It was not much. It was everything. Bran opened his eyes again. "I can't stop it," he said, voice hollow and awestruck at his own admission. "Not entirely. The power is in motion. The patterns have begun. Can slow them, redirect them. But some places will still freeze. Some will die. Some always do," Jon said. "We've lived with that truth since the first man picked up a spear. I will be bound to this," Bran continued. "Always, watching, adjusting. If I let my attention slip, the winter will surge again. I will never be free." "You were never going to be free," Arya said bluntly. "Not once you took that power, but you can choose what you're shackled to. A dead world, or a broken one that keeps limping on." Bran's gaze met Jon's again. "You'll hate me," he said. "You already do a little." Jon swallowed. "I don't know what I feel," he said honestly. "But I know this. If I walk out of here and the snow starts to melt in a few places, I'll call that a victory. Even if I never forgive you completely." A ghost of a smile touched Bran's lips. It wasn't the cold, alien, not quite smile he'd worn as the new Night King. It was crooked, human, painfully familiar. "I used to think you were the stupid one," Bran said softly. charging into fights you couldn't win, refusing to see the larger picture. And now, Jon asked. Now I think you're necessary, Bran said. Someone has to pull at the thread that unravels the neat pattern. You sound like Tyrion, Arya muttered. Bran's eyes unfocused for a moment, as if listening to a joke told far away. He'll be pleased, he said faintly, if he lives long enough to hear about it. He lifted his hands. The chamber filled with a gentle, crystalline sound, like ice cracking in slow motion. The air brightened, faint glows appearing within the walls as if fireflies had been trapped in the ice. The ice tree's branches shivered, shedding a thin dusting of frost like snow. Across Westeros, the winter shifted. In the far north, nothing changed. The land had already passed a point of no return, glaciers grinding forward, seas turning to solid expanses of ice. That region would remain frozen, a white crown on the world's brow. Farther south, in the north proper, the snowpacks lessened slightly. Rivers that had been reduced to narrow, sluggish flows widened a fraction. In the riverlands, some frozen fields began to thaw at the edges. In the Reach, a single stubborn green shoot pierced the snow. In King's Landing, Daenerys stepped out onto a balcony and felt, for the first time in years, a breeze that did not sting. She closed her eyes, let it brush her face, and laughed, the sound sharp with disbelief and fragile hope. Something's happened, she said. Tyrion peered out past her, eyes narrowed. Let's hope it's not the sort of something that comes with dragons or bells, he said. But there was a light in his gaze that hadn't been there in a long time. Back in the Ice Palace, Bran swayed. Jon surged forward instinctively, catching him under the arms. Bran's body was light, almost unnaturally so, like carved ice rather than flesh. And yet, under Jon's hands, he felt a faint warmth, a pulse. You all right? Jon asked, voice rough. Bran blinked slowly. I've changed the pattern, he murmured. It will take constant effort to hold it. The winter will push against my adjustments. It wants stillness. And you? Arya asked. What do you want? He thought about it. I don't know anymore, he admitted. But I know what I don't want. I don't want the last voices to be screams, or the last breath to be a curse. If there must be an ending, I'd prefer it be quieter, softer, with a few good stories left behind. We'll see to the stories, Arya said. Jon eased Bran back onto the ice seat. It had changed too subtly. It looked less like an altar now, more like a bench carved beneath a tree. I'll tell them you listened, Jon said, that you saved who you could. They'll make songs, Arya said wryly. Call you Bran the Cold, or the Last King, or some such. Bran's lips twitched again. They always do like their grand names, he murmured. If they must, let it be something simple. Bran Stark is enough. Jon nodded. They didn't embrace. The ice between them, literal and otherwise, made that feel strangely wrong. But Jon placed his hand briefly over Bran's, the cold biting but tolerable. If you start freezing us all again, Arya said, her tone only half joking, I'll come back and stick you. I know, Bran said. That's why I trust myself to try this. They left him there, in his palace of ice and memory, the new Night King who had chosen not to rule a perfectly frozen Westeros, but an imperfectly thawing one. The years that followed were hard. The climate never returned to what it had been. Summers were short, cool things more like long springs. Winters were still bitter and frequent. Many lands that had once been fertile remained marginal. Westeros shrank, in a sense, its habitable regions narrower, its population smaller. But life found ways. Farmers learned new crops, new timings. Fishermen adapted to altered spawning cycles. Lords who refused to share what resources they had found themselves overthrown by those WH. Sometimes, when the snows were heavy and the winter threatened to tip too far toward death, a dream would pass through the north like a shared breath. Farmers waking with the sudden knowledge of where to find a patch of unfrozen ground, sailors dreaming of a clear channel through treacherous ice floes. They knew who to thank. Far to the north, In his palace that had grown less rigid and more organic over time, branches of ice curling like living wood, Bran watched. He watched generations rise and fall. He watched small kindnesses that no one thought significant. A crust of bread shared, a child pulled from a river, a song sung in a dark tavern lift tired hearts for a night. He watched petty cruelties too, of course. He watched wars, though they were fewer and smaller than they might have been. He watched as slowly, painstakingly, people adapted. He never stopped feeling the pull of the deeper cold, the temptation to let go, to allow the winter to finish its work. It would be so simple, a brief relaxation of his will, a few degrees drop, a year of storms instead of seasons. In those moments, when loneliness pressed hardest, he remembered Jon's hand on his shoulder, Arya's threat, Sansa's anger, old Nan's cackling tales. He remembered Hodder. He remembered the warmth of a direwolf's breath on his face. He remembered that he was still Bran, and so the world went on. Not in the way the old songs had promised, not in endless summer or glorious fire, but in a long, stubborn twilight, where people huddled close against the cold and told stories about how the Night King had once come to rule a frozen Westeros. They spoke of how, in the end, he had chosen instead to hold the winter back, just enough for them to live. In their stories, he was a monster, a savior, a cautionary tale. He was a boy who had seen too much, a king who ruled from a throne of ice, a god of winter who had decided, against his own nature, to be merciful. In the quiet heart of the far north, Bran listened to those stories through the roots of trees and the whispers of the wind, and for all the cold in him, he felt something like warmth. The world would end someday. All worlds did. But until that day came, until the last snowflake fell on the last roof of the last home, there would be choices. There would be people. There would be life, stubborn and fragile and infuriating, breathing in the space he had carved out between fire and ice, that he decided was enough.